Wonderful. Thank you so many people for sticking around. If you weren't able to be in the chairs here, I don't want you to, end up with a neck issue. So feel free to bring chairs around. We do have a couple of extra seats. I see some food here, but I don't know who that is. So it looks like this chair comes with a special bonus. I did put the packets around. If you didn't get a chance to check them out already, you can check them out afterwards. So just the shortest introduction of the program itself. Hopefully you've already read about it in the newsletter and so forth. But as long as I've been here, we've always had the elders have an assigned geographic area, and the people who live in that geographic area, the elders try to help provide spiritual support and care for. And every year, multiple times a year, we'll say, you know what we should really do? We should really go through those lists again and really get them lined up so that we know who everybody is, and then really make a big push for contacting people and really, because we're afraid people maybe kind of fall through the cracks and when there's needs and that sort of thing. And so this year we finally got around to doing it. We had sort of a elders spiritual care fantasy draft. We gave all the elders a full list of all the families, and then they just checked off all the families that they knew already, kind of person to person on an individual basis. We decided to abandon the geographic approach, and then with Linda's help I went through the whole list and kind of tried to split it up so that each has about in the neighborhood of 13, 14 families. And almost all of those are families where they marked off, this is somebody that I already know, maybe I interact with them already through something else. Every once in a while, if you look for your list, it's possible you're going to find you don't know your elder. That's certainly possible, although hopefully you've met them by now. But the whole intent here is not, I got one email back from somebody who I think maybe thought this was a way of fundraising. Because they said, we would prefer not to be included in the program. It's like, well, you can't stop us from praying for you. I'm sorry. I like to meet requests as much as I can, but we may still pray for you and your family. So this is not a fundraising thing at all. This is just a way to try to make sure that we, as a church, and the elders being in charge of the spiritual care of the congregation from the congregation side, are doing everything we can to try to reach out and support people as life goes on, so that we don't find out 3 weeks later, oh man, so-and-so was in the hospital, we didn't even know, or that sort of thing. And so that there's an easier way to try to stay in touch with. If you've got concerns or issues, I still have people who say, I guess I'm kind of intimidating. Because people say, well, I didn't want to trouble you with that. It's like, well, actually, that's what I'm paid for. But if it's easier to talk to someone other than the pastor, I totally understand that. That's totally fine. So all of that's what went into this. But the other part of it, as we were talking about it, was the value of getting a chance to know. Even in these settings, how long of a conversation are you able to have with somebody? And if we're honest, how much do we remember 2 weeks later of what they told us? And so thought it would be a nice idea to be able to hear from each of our elders. We have 6, so it worked out well to split up into 3 weeks, 2 elders each. They'll present a little bit about themselves, both kind of biographical background, some of their spiritual journey, maybe something that they're wrestling with now in their own spiritual lives, or how they try to bring their faith to bear in their day job, or various day jobs, various vocations. And so it's really pretty open-ended. I gave them a worksheet of just kind of some prompter questions, but it really left it very open-ended for them to present whatever they wish to present. And our first guinea pig or sacrificial lamb or setting the bar wherever it's going to be set, think of it however you wish, is Dan Swanson. So Dan, thank you so much. And does everybody want these cookies and fruit? That's
well, those are mine, I'm sorry.
I'll bring them to you, yeah.
You made me move my chair. I thought I was going to be sitting up there.
No problem.
Hi, everybody. Morning. Morning. So it's pretty cool to be able to do this, so thank you. So I was born in Rockford, Illinois, really kind of interesting little town, but it's funny, despite being Scandinavian and living in Illinois, and I lived on a street named Augustana Drive. Some of you know that Luther was an Augustinian monk. I was not Lutheran. Pastor Wismar just couldn't believe that I was from Illinois and Swedish and not a Lutheran. Anyways, Rockford was predominantly a blue-collar town. It's now a fading Rust Belt city. So I'm now on the East Coast. So my wife Kathy and I have 3 kids, Claire, Jack, and Rissa, 20, 18, and 16. Jack's graduating on Tuesday from high school. Yeah. We lived here for 15 years, so all our kids went through Newtown schools. Prior to that, we lived in Carmel, New York for 8 years. We attended an ELCA church in Jefferson Valley over there, and all 3 kids were baptized in that church. We ended up moving here and actually started attending this church before we physically moved to Newtown. All 3 kids confirmed their faith in this church, with Claire being in pastor's first class. To transition.
She set the bar really high.
Yes. I graduated high school in 1984 from a school that's much like Newtown, about the same size and kind of upper middle class, where most kids went off to college, kind of a college prep school. My folks were blue collar folks, both off farms. My mother was from Missouri, my dad's from Minnesota. He was Lutheran, and I have the cookbook to prove it. So if you want any good recipes, my brother-in-law actually and I, we sat down at one holiday recently and went through and read these with great amusement, all the different recipes. So he was raised Lutheran. My mother was Baptist, Southern Baptist, and I think their family became Christian through listening to radio down that way. So I started as a Baptist and spent the majority of my life in the Evangelical Covenant Church. You know, I'm familiar you are with that. That's how my faith journey began. I went to Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois. So we were surrounded by corn, very flat. I joined University Christian Fellowship. Some of you may be familiar. It's a pretty large, it's like Campus Crusade on campus. We were the largest largest student organization on campus. 24,000 students in whole on campus, and we were probably 400 students. So we had a pretty good voice on campus, pretty involved. We had street preachers come to stand on the quad and engage students with who Christ is and sharing our faith. So that was my part of my college experience. My faith, and as pastor likes to say, we are mutts. I'm a mutt in terms of my faith growth. I don't think I was baptized as many times as you. I was just once. So I would say my background is kind of a hodgepodge of confused or lack of doctrine, I would say. I grew up in the land, I think of I found it bumper stickers. Do people remember I found it bumper stickers? Maybe that was more of a Midwest thing, but it was people would drive around in the mid-'70s with I found it bumper stickers. And it was about I found Jesus, and it was a Campus Crusade thing. And then the I lost it bumper stickers came next. It was also the land of the moral majority. The 4 spiritual laws. I don't know if you're familiar with those, the 4 spiritual laws, which is Campus Crusade idea. You have to remember, I was in high school and college. Those were the Reagan years, so it was an interesting time in our country with conservative shift after the Carter years. So yes, I was raised in a church, Sunday school, vacation Bible school, youth group. I was curious about the Covenant Church and what the viewpoint is online about the Covenant Church. And it says it's a pietistic Christian denomination in the evangelical Protestant tradition founded in 1885 by Swedish immigrants. Historically Lutheran in theology and background, it is now a broadly evangelical movement. It grew out of the spiritual awakening of the 19th century. So it was Swedish, good at my book. It had some Lutheran ties, sounds great, but that's pretty much where it ended with my experience. We had a very large church in town. There were 3 very large, I guess we call them evangelical. There were 2, the Evangelical Free Church, Assembly of God Church, and the Covenant Church. And we all kind of vied for membership. And we all built our big churches. And I had sports teams. We were very competitive. We had about 120 kids in our youth group. So a good-sized church, and we had the youth room with ping pong tables and air hockey and snack bar and the whole thing, and it was a great experience. I was raised with confusion on the sacraments, and so much so that we didn't call them sacraments. We knew this thing called baptism, wasn't quite sure what that was. Once a month on the first Sunday, we would have crackers and grape juice, and we would call that communion. And again, I was still like, well, why are we doing this? What is this all about? We would, depending on who the pastor was at the time, we would sprinkle infants. We didn't do baptism in our church, but I was baptized, I think, around the age of 10. But we had to go to a Baptist church to have it done because they had the baptistry. And for us, that was the public proclamation, thank you, of our faith. And you gave a little speech and you got dunked, and that's what happened. I remember it, but I wasn't really sure what was going on. I was confirmed in 9th grade, and we read 2 books. Paul Little wrote these 2 books, Know What You Believe and Know Why You Believe. And it was good to learn about, well, what's God, what's Jesus, what's the Trinity, and then know why you believe and defending your faith. But we didn't study the small catechism for some reason. So I would sum up my youth as being raised in kind of a Christian subculture. The town I grew up in, we had 150,000 people. We had 2 Christian radio stations, one contemporary, one sacred, and then of course we had Moody Bible Institute from Chicago blasting us from Chicago. We had 3 Christian bookstores, and one that was just there to sell Christian music albums, which was great. I was into that music because regular rock music, secular rock music was not allowed in my house. So I found an alternative in Christian rock music. So it was an interesting child from that perspective. From little on up, we went to church a lot, and I learned the word of the books of the Bible. I learned the key verses. I memorized Isaiah 53. Had all these great experiences, and I was learning all these things, but I really didn't know what the gospel was and how to explain that to someone. What is the gospel? So I did pray the sinner's prayer at a very young age. I remember it, and we were raised to believe that kids would get to the age where they're accountable and they can make a decision for God. And so I remember that was very ingrained in me. Later, went to Northern Illinois University, met my wife there, and met a lot of people like me, similar stories. Met a lot of Catholics. I'm like, wow, Catholics. We weren't allowed to hang out with Catholics when I was a kid. Like, you don't do that. What was that? Yeah, welcome to England. Yeah. Former Catholics and an occasional Lutheran, believe it or not. They were really good people that, good friendships, what it's like in college. And they're trying to find not only themselves, but a major when you're 20 years old. So I was exposed to agnostics, atheists, searchers. In college, I was often the resident go-to Christian historian in class. So I was an English minor, and we're studying Milton. It's like, okay, Dan, what do you think about that? What's the reference to that, or philosophy, or any kind of English literature? It was mostly during my senior year, though, that kind of came to bear during, I was studying rhetorical theory. I was a communication major. And it was interesting, if you look back in history and the growth of Christianity, how integral the Apostle Paul was in terms of Western civilization. And that really came out in the courses that I had, and you can really see the spread of Christianity and the change from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance to the Reformation because of the Apostle Paul and the spread of the gospel. And so in classes, we would sit there, and my professor was an atheist, and he would beat on his chest and say, I'm an atheist. As it turns out, he was raised a Lutheran. And we became very good friends, matter of fact. And most of my friends were like, you're not going to go see that teacher and go to his classes, are you? He's an atheist, And I said, yeah, and we ended up, he became my graduate advisor, and I ended up watching his children every day after school until the parents came home. So we had a great relationship through college. I was proud to say that in my last class with him, he came in and handed us the syllabus, and he said, okay, everybody, assume a B in this class. No one gets an A in this class. And so in grad school, if you get a C, that's like failing. So we're all like, oh, let's shoot for the B. I got an A. So I'm pretty proud of that. So I really did view my 6 years in college. I got 2 degrees, so it wasn't 6 years for bachelor's.
Just to be clear.
Is invaluable and really in living in the marketplace of ideas. And it really was awesome when I got to grad school. It's kind of like you're no longer, Jim and I were just talking about this, you're no longer a dog undergrad, you're now a grad student. And you're part of the university, and that was a really cool situation to be in. And so I was able to represent on some level the Christian worldview, monotheism, and this was a time where modernism was moving to this new thing called postmodernism, and breaking down categories. There's no more absolutes. That was really kind of the first thing that was happening in the late 80s. The first time I was exposed to Luther, believe it or not, right across from my house was a huge Lutheran church. And we're like, well, I don't know what those people are. They're Lutherans, and they must be very quiet because we don't hear them or anything. But we played and they had great ball fields and stuff, and we used them. But I read a paper that my brother wrote for his confirmation. He was 3 years older than me, and it was about Luther. And I read it. I was like, he had this experience of lightning. He said, "I'll be an Augustinian monk." And it was, as you look back, it's kind of like Paul's conversion of. He's out in this field, and Paul was blinded, but Luther said, instead of like, God, I'll do anything, I'll be a monk. I just found that interesting. That stuck with me, but it would take me a long time to get back to be a Lutheran. I came to be a Lutheran as many of you through studying and conversations, a lot of reading. So you guys are probably all familiar with this book. Pastor uses this with new members. The Spirituality of the Cross, which is subtitled The Way of the First Evangelicals. So when I heard that, I said, what? Lutherans are evangelicals? Because I'm in the Midwest, I'm an evangelical, I'm a purebred evangelical. We're in the Midwest, we're the backbone of the country, and we're on the right side of history, and we're Republicans after all, so we're all set. So it was just interesting. So honestly, we were struggling, where do we go to church? And we talked about, the Reformation, and Catholic would say, well, we're Reformed, and Catholic came out of a Catholic tradition. And so I was like, oh, Catholic. And so one of my good friends from Rockford, Illinois, who Stephen Johnson, lived in Mahopac, New York. And if you know Mahopac and Carmel, they're kind of twin little towns over in New York. And I've known him since I think we were 1st and 2nd grade, grew up in the same church together. He just happened to be living out in Mahopac. And we stood on our deck one night in Carmel, New York, and said, where are we going to go to church? Because the evangelical thing wasn't working for us, and so now we're both Missouri Lutherans. He happens to go to a church in, I think it's Pauling. It's also called Christ the King Lutheran Church. So how appropriate. So his children have also been baptized and confirmed their faith. So it's just really interesting how God has drawn us to this unknown Lutheran church. I really wasn't sure how it fit in my experience as a Christian. Who are these people? So anyways, let's see. Move on. I guess as a Lutheran over time, I've learned about the confessions of our faith through the creeds. And it's interesting how you read about the Athanasian Creed and the Nicene Creed and how they define our beliefs. And you go back and study them. This is 4th and 5th century stuff. This isn't new. But there were attacks on the church during that time. They responded with these creeds that we repeat today. That is so amazing. Sacraments. God has taught me how He feeds us and nurtures us through the sacrament, through His Word. We're very fortunate that we can come to church each week. We hear law, we hear gospel. We hear our need for the gospel. We hear about our sin. And that's what we get to hear each week. And the other thing we get to hear and celebrate is Easter every Sunday. So I really appreciate that. So I guess to sum up, a couple things. I've been reading about, as I'm learning more and more about baptism, I would go, well, why was Jesus baptized? You know, you go, why is Jesus baptized? It doesn't make sense. He's God. Why does he have to be baptized? I got to get why I have to go through my baptism. But if you read, for example, in Matthew, the scripture says, he was baptized to fulfill all righteousness. And then after his baptism, God said what to him? This is my son whom I love. You know, so it's like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then there's the chapter in John where Jesus is sitting with, I think the Pharisees. They're sitting in the temple perhaps. And he's talking about his sheep, and I'm the shepherd of those. And those don't necessarily know my name yet, and I've called them. And then he launches into, and I should read it just to do it justice. But he says, he talks about I'm the good shepherd. And then he switches gear in verse 17. He says, the reason my Father loves me is I lay down my life only to take it up again. So I can imagine those people going, you're talking about being the shepherd, and he goes, oh, by the way, but the reason my Father loves me, you know, is because I lay down my life only to take it up again. And he's talking about, obviously, his crucifixion. And he's saying to them, you know what, you're not killing me. I have the authority to lay down my life. You know, and I take it up again. So it's just, and just the parallel about how he talks about how his Father loves him, right? So I just find that very, very moving. So my vocation, Pastor, I had to talk about this. So because I studied communication therapy, I ended up in health insurance. So, perfect transition. So, Jack, when you choose a major, don't end up in insurance. But my kids would ask me, like, what do you do when you go to work? And I'm like, how do you explain this? So I started as an underwriter, worked in New York, worked all in Westchester County and Syracuse. And I came to the conclusion that I help people pay their medical bills. That's what I do. So I did that for a long time, and I now am moving into a second career as a financial advisor. And I think what it is what I like about it is I get to help people. And we all do that in our jobs, but you know, in this it's, you know, people worry about medical bills. I mean, talking about an emotion thing, and then people worry about their finances. So if I can help any measure that, that's what I try to do. So in conclusion, I'm privileged to be an elder here, and you know, 15 years, it's a fairly long time to be here. I'm not here as long as Gary, but it's a privilege to be here and to know you all. I had a lot of time at Lent Soup Suppers this year and just had a blast. Getting to know you all. And what I've really seen in our church is a cultural change, I think, just in inclusiveness, and not meaning that we're not so inward looking, but we're also outward looking. So I've really seen that cultural change, and we care about each other, and so greatly appreciate you. Thanks for your time.
Not easy to do, not easy to go first. Now, as Dan mentioned, our next presenter is relatively new to the congregation. He's only been a member here for about, 56 years? So, I gotta tell you, well, I don't want to take any of your content, so I won't say, I'll say afterwards what Gary's concern was about presenting. But, so very happy to have, now for a long time, Gary has been, basically until a couple of months ago, Gary's been the head elder here, and it also speaks a little bit to Gary's character and who he is, that he said, guys, I am more than willing to keep serving. But I also feel it's good for others to have the ability and to develop the skills. So I'd be happy to keep serving, but if anybody else wants to, go right ahead. And so I don't introduce him as the head elder this year, because he's not. He's just one of us, one of the soldiers. But very happy to introduce Gary Gollenberg, who's held just about every different role here, including the trumpeter at the very first time there was a service here, a role that continues to this day, and just about every other role in between. And so Gary, you're up next.
All right.
I'd like to say it's a pleasure to be here today. And as Pastor Rob mentioned, I have a little bit of a history here. And so it's, I've always thought of it as an advantage, but also a disadvantage, because I haven't seen all the different congregations and the different, you know, nuances of you know, being somewhere else and, you know, growing up in a different religion and having that decision of, do I switch? There's something here I'm not comfortable with. I've been comfortable as a Lutheran, a member of this church, my entire life. I've never looked for another church. But let me start out with a little history, and then we can get into a little more of the church stuff. I was born in 1953 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. My dad grew up in Bridgeport, and my mom in Trumbull. They both were members of Zion Lutheran in Bridgeport for many, many years. And that's a church that, you know, used to be big enough to have a church school and, you know, a huge congregation and athletic leagues and everything like that. Right now they're down to about 6 or 10 active members, which is a shame. And they still choose to worship there. They can't partly close the church, but you know, it's a sad thing for them to see. But anyway, so when I was born, my dad was in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. It ended up he did not go overseas, and it turned out that one of the reasons that he did not go overseas is because he was on leave when I was born, when his unit was shipped to Korea. And it ended up they transferred him to a different unit, a different thing, and he stayed in a transportation battalion down in Fort Eustis, Virginia. So I guess I might have been a little bit responsible for him not having to slide through the mud of Korea. So, you know, he's a very proud veteran, and you know, talks about it a lot. But while early times, we lived at my mom's parents' house while my parents built the house that my dad still lives in today over on Taunton Hill Road. So they built that with friends, neighbors, and some local talent, and you know, so you know, that was a great place to grow up, a great town to grow up in here. My mom, some of you may not know her, but because she was very, very active here. She passed away 2 years after a long fight with breast cancer. But you know, for both of them, this church has been in their life. So I went through the Newtown school system. In fact, I was a member of the first graduating class for what then was the Newtown High School. In 1971, was co-captain of the football team. We were the first undefeated team in Newtown High School. But it's interesting is my choice of college, or my college opportunity, was totally helped by being the co-captain of the team. I was all set to go to Lehigh University to study civil engineering. I actually was to the point of having a deposit in and a initial class schedule. And someone, I believe they lived in Trumbull, approached me, and they said to me, they're looking for football players down at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy in Kingsport, New York. I said, oh, well, I'm all set to go to school. And the recruiter goes to me, would you like to go to school for free? Which was the case. The U.S. Merchant Marine Academy is the least known of all the federal institutions. It's a 4-year program. 1 year of it is actually spent out at sea, traveling on commercial vessels. There's other maritime schools where like 300, even the Coast Guard, they'll all go out on their the Eagle, the training ship. But what we would do was one person that worked in the engine room and one person that worked up on deck, they would go, just the two of them, on a commercial ship, just all over the world. So I boarded my first ship in New York Harbor, and we promptly sailed for the west coast of Africa. We went to Nigeria and Sierra Leone and some of the countries that have all changed names about 15 times since then on the west coast of Africa. And that was my first trip there. Then after that, I went to, where did I go after that? I went to Northern Europe. I went on a container ship, which were new ships at the time, where they take the containers and stack them up and down. So we went from New York to Bremerhaven, Germany, Le Havre, France, Antwerp, and Southampton, England, and back in 21 days. That was a complete round trip for a ship. Yeah, it was amazing. And it was in the middle, in the North Atlantic, in the wintertime. You know, it was just, it was, I mean, it was like this the whole time. But they had a schedule. I was in Le Havre, France for 6 hours, from midnight to 6 in the morning. So I just happened to get up early enough to go down, walk down the gangplank, stepped on the ground and walked back. I've been to France. Yeah. And then after that, my last ship that first year was a ship that took me to the coast of South America, to Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and that was also in the wintertime, but it was summertime down there. It was absolutely beautiful. So I saw both sides of the thing. And then that was my first 6 months, and then I went back to school, and then 2 years later I had another sea thing, and I stayed on an oil tanker that went from the coastwise United States from this was based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I went down to we went down to Charleston, South Carolina, and then picked up fuel and did stuff and brought stuff back up to the Boston area and things like that. So that was my other sea-year experience. So the trade-off for getting your 4 years of college education is they want you have to serve 3 years afterwards as a commitment. You had your choice of going into the Navy or the Coast Guard or on a maritime company. So I joined Exxon Company USA, and I sailed on their oil tankers, mostly East Coast, or Texas to Boston, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana to New York and things like that. But then there was one ship I was on. We went back and forth through the Panama Canal 5 times on the same ship because they would be bringing the oil down from Alaska, and the huge ships couldn't get into through the canal, but the smaller ones could. So we would unload out at sea and then come back to the East Coast to either Texas or Baton Rouge to discharge and stuff like that. So that was interesting. And then at this time, we were engaged, right? At the time, my last year at sea. Well, we'll get back to that story a little bit. But, the last year of me being out to sea, it seemed like every time I got assigned to a ship, because we would go 90 days on, 45 days off was the working schedule. The 90 days on was either 8 or 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you did need the time off when you were done. But my last ship, they kept sending me back out to California, to go California to Alaska. And that was, we were married at the time. So that's another reason. We had just been married. And the last time when I knew my 3rd-year commitment would be filled up, and it sounded like they wanted to keep sending me to Alaska. I said, it's time to get out. So, but anyway, so I looked around. In fact, I think I fulfilled my commitment and had my 3 years in, and they called me and were going to send me another ship, and I said, I think I'm going to leave. And they said, oh, did you find another job? Can we offer a job